No little red light. Okay. Good morning to everyone. Today is our last class in our series discussing what was given at Sinai and the revelation at Sinai. During the first three classes, we focused very much on the written law, what exactly was communicated to Bnei Israel, to the Jewish people at Sinai, of what we call today the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. We then talked about what part of the Torah was communicated to Bnei Israel, what part was communicated to Moshe Rabbeinu, and then we talked about how that was committed to writing, the various theories within the tradition about what was written in the Bible, in the Torah and the 5 books of Moses. We talked about the various beliefs emerging from the Chazal as well as the Rishonim, the medieval commentaries, in terms of how much do we push the divinity of the Torah versus the Mosaic authorship together with the divinity of the Torah. According to the Rambam, one has to believe as one of the tenets of faith that not only did HaKadosh Baruch Hu communicate what we call the Torah directly to Moshe Rabbeinu, but that exactly Moshe Rabbeinu committed it to writing, and it's exactly the same as we have today, implying that one has to believe that there's no such thing as post-Mosaic authorship in any way, shape, or form, even if it's divine, even if it was communicated by God to a separate prophet. And then pointed out that there are Deot and Chazal that disagree with that say, for example, that the last 8 verses in the Torah were written by Yoshua and not by Moshe Rabbeinu, ostensibly with Ruach HaKodesh. We talked about Sefer Devarim, how Sefer Devarim was communicated. We talked about different theories about that. And then we talked, and we showed that in the medieval period, certainly the Rambam's position was the dominant position, that the entirety of the Torah was communicated to Moshe Rabbeinu. On the other hand, we saw the Ibn Ezra, we saw Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, we saw other echoes within the medieval period who wanted to claim that one is not out of the pale in any way if one claims that certain phrases, sections, especially of narrative, specifically of narrative, may have been edited and added later as an interpolation by future prophets, by Yoshua, by the Anshe Knesset Agdola, by Chizkiyahu, etc., in order to help explain what was going on or for other purposes. And that, of course, was a minority view, but it's a view that says that the key is not necessarily Mosaic authorship, the key is divinity, that we believe that God, Torah min hashamayim, as opposed to what we might call Torah mi Sinai, if we want to use those kind of terms. We then, after that, we talked about, at the end of last class, we talked about the sources that discuss that whatever you believe about the communication of the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu, and whatever you believe of how that came into writing, whether it was written serially with an S, or whether it was communicated from start to finish, and even if you take the Rambam's position that every single word of the Torah was communicated to Moshe Rabbeinu from Aleph to Taf, at the conclusion, or at Sinai, or at the conclusion of Sinai, the question is, once that Torah was then thrust into the world of real-life human beings, how did they transmit it for generation to generation? And then, of course, we saw sources in Chazal, the Gemara in Kiddushin, and other places that seemed to have an exact count of the letters, etc. And they said that this word is the middle of the Torah, this word is the middle of the Torah. And it turns out that in our Masoretic tradition, already in the Middle Ages, they realized that it wasn't exactly aligned, that it was a little bit off, and that not every Sefer Torah in the world looked exactly the same. And Ashkenazim and Sephardim had 3 different, there are a couple of words which we write differently in the Sefer Torah. Or that Kri and Ktiv, which I didn't talk about last week, the fact that sometimes it should be read this way and sometimes it should be read that way. And the Radak, the Radak claims, at least in Nach, Kri and Ktiv is a reflection of different traditions about how to write this word that they had, because in the vicissitudes of exile and the vicissitudes of history, as perfectly as they tried to commit the Torah to writing, sometimes they may have made different error, they had a different tradition, and you have different scribal decisions. Now, at a certain point, the Masoretic text, they decided in general to do it this way, but then too, subsequently to the canonization of the Bible in the time of Yavne and the canonization of the text of the Bible, so our Bible doesn't look like the Septuagint or like the Samaritan Bible, but still, there's hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years till the age of printing when everything could be exactly the same. And here too in the Middle Ages. And how did they decide? So the only way they decided was through Rove. And so it's very clear that, again, even though the Sifrei Torah that we have today are almost exactly like the Sifrei Torah they had in the time of Chazal, there are slight differences. But it doesn't matter because we live a Torah's Chaim, we live a Torah based on how it was accepted by the Chachamim and the criterion of each generation. And whatever criterion we accept, that's the Sefer Torah that's kosher to read. We're not archaeologists to try to... Yeah, it may be that the Sefer Torah that Yoshua or that Shlomo HaMelech or that the Rambam read was slightly different. Again, very slightly different than the Sefer Torah, but that would be puzzle in Ashkenazi circles because we have certain traditions about how to write the Torah, etc. And that's okay. Like we saw last week in the Sefer Torah of Rashi, it didn't have a Vav. But in this Sefer Torah of Rashi, it did have a Vav. All these differences, which are minor, and the Rambam knew. Why wasn't he a little bit more nuanced in his language? So many scholars have pointed out because the Rambam wanted to make a very straight polemical statement that the Torah that we have today, God forbid, you should believe, was somehow forged as the way certain Muslim scholars and thought started to claim about some of the passages of the Torah. And so for the Rambam didn't want to get into nuance. He simply said the Torah that we have today is exactly the same Torah. But many people have noted that obviously the Rambam was aware of the Chaseros and the Yeseros, and he was aware that they were different. He himself talks about that there's good Sifrei Torah and bad Sifrei Torah, and there's the Aleppo Codex, and so he obviously was aware of that, but he wasn't going to get in that theological place, getting into the nuances of that. Okay, so with that, we finished our discussion. Obviously, there's a lot more to say. These are short lessons. A lot more to say about it. For those who want to pursue it further, there are a number of books that discuss the canonical and consonantal words of the Torah. Specifically, if you want to look at Mark Shapiro's famous book on the limits of Orthodox theology, where he talks about this principle, the eighth principle of the Rambam, he has a lot of discussion, and he quotes all the Makoros and all the sources, and you can see everything there in further detail. Today, I wanted to spend, because I did promise in the blurb that we were going to talk about Torah Shebaal Peh. So really I need like 2 or 3 lessons more, but I don't have the time, so I'm just going to do it b'kitzer in one lesson. I wanted to talk about what do we believe was revealed in the oral law at Sinai, because in addition, one of the cardinal tenets of traditional Judaism is in addition to a written law, there was also an oral law, Torah Shebaal Peh, that was communicated to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe kibel Torah Sinai u'misara liYoshua, we say in the Mishnah, and that is a tenet of our belief, as opposed to, let's say, the Karaites or the Sadducees who rejected a lot of what we today call the rabbinic tradition. We believe very strongly. That's what makes us rabbinic Jews. We're all rabbinic Jews. Even Reformed Jews are rabbinic Jews. They just reformed rabbinic Judaism, but they're still rabbinic Jews. They're not Karaites. And if a person doesn't keep Judaism, they're not keeping rabbinic Judaism. It's not that they're not keeping Karaitic Judaism. So what exactly do we believe? So I want to lay out 3 basic, obviously there'll be nuances, but 3 basic approaches within the tradition to what we believe was given at Sinai, based on different sources. The first approach is what you might call, again, I don't want to caricature, but one might call a very Haredi approach to the transmission of the oral law. And that's based on a famous Agadita in the Gemara in Brachot. For those who've been doing Daf Yomi, you probably did it 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. I don't remember exactly. I don't keep up. So the Gemara says in Daf Hey, at the very end of towards the end of Perek Chaf Daled in Sefer Shemot, where we have the covenantal ceremony, where God says to Moses, "Go up, and I'm going to give you the luchot." In Yitro, Hashem says the Aseret HaDibrot, in Mishpat, in Perek Chav Daled, Hashem gives the Luchot to Moshe Rabbeinu. So on that, there's a very famous Amoraic Agartha. The Amar Rabbi Levi Bar Chama, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Mai Dichtiv. What does it mean? And it says in Mishpat in Perek Chav Daled, Va'etna lecha luchot ha'even ve'atorah ve'amitzvah asher katavti lahorotam. And I'm giving you here the luchot ha'even. I'm giving you here the tablets and the Torah and the mitzvah which I wrote. Now the simple reading is, I'm giving you the luchot upon which is the Torah and the mitzvah which I told you to write, which I wrote to teach them. But Chazal, of course, in their hyper reading of the text, and in their view that every word has omni-significance, as they say in the literature class. So Chazal say, what does each word mean? Luchot Ela Aseret HaDibrot. Elu Aseret HaDibrot. Torah Zemikra. This refers to the rest of Tanakh, or the Torah. HaMitzvah Zu Mishnah. That includes everything that's in the Mishnah. Asher Katavti Elu Nevi'im Uktuvim. Lahorotam Zegmara. Melamed Shekulam Nitnu LeMoshe MiSinai. This is the famous statement that every single jot and tittle of the rabbinic corpus, ostensibly we're talking about the legal material, I assume that's the thrust of this Agartha, not necessarily the stories, they didn't happen yet, unless maybe you can want to claim that, maybe Moshe Rabbeinu was given a kind of bird's eye, a preview of everything that would happen in Jewish history. But the point is, the totality of the rabbinic corpus was given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai. Everything included in the Mishnah, everything included in the Gemara was given to Moshe Rabbeinu. Now,
how do we explain a machloket then?
Okay, so according to this approach, what would you do with machloket? So the response would be the breakdown of the tradition. People didn't study properly. People forgot. The dislocation of exile, and in the course of the vicissitudes of history, things broke down. And then, what machloket and the rabbinic enterprise is an attempt to recapture what was originally given to Sinai. So the entire process of learning and drushot and all that is a process of recovery. We're constantly trying to get, now we may be successful, we may not, we're human beings, but the entire process is to use the best tools available to us to try to recover what was originally given at Sinai. So it's a recovery mission. The enterprise of Talmud Torah, the rabbinic enterprise, is fundamentally a recovery mission to reconstruct what was originally given at Sinai. That's this approach.
So we're reconstructionists.
We're reconstructionists, exactly. Not only reform, we're reconstructionists. We're trying to recapture what was given at Sinai, go back to what was given at Sinai. There's no creativity in the sense of new things. We're actually trying to, and there's a lot of Agadot that talk about that. How after Moshe Rabbeinu died, they forgot all of these kal v'chomers, and they forgot all of these halachos, and they have to try to reconstruct all these halachos. Because fundamentally, the Torah Shebaal Peh is the totality of the system was passed on from generation to generation, except for things which are explicitly presented as takanot, or as explicitly presented as gzeirot, like muktzah. Muktzah wasn't given at Sinai. Chazal explicitly say, we had a problem, so we want to address it. We made a siyag la Torah. We made a fence around the Torah. But if you don't talk about those things, or you don't talk about the takana, we made a takana that that on Mondays and Thursdays they should read Torah, or this, and those are takanot that are clearly were responding to a need, a societal need, a religious need, and a mamonist need, whatever it is, a certain takana. Those takanos are post-Sinai, but everything else is okay. And therefore, when you have a machlokes in the Gemara in Sanhedrin or somewhere else about whether a sukkah has 3 walls or a sukkah should have 2.5 walls, basically they're trying to find out what is the original Ur source, what is the original Ur halacha, and everything that they do is an attempt, to the best of our ability, to recapture b'siyata d'shmaya, what exactly it was. Now, practically, we have to live. So there's going to be determinants. The Sanhedrin and the Chazal have to take votes to decide what practically we do. Is this kosher? Is this not kosher? Is this a good sukkah? But that's a practical issue. The enterprise is to recapture what was given at Sinai. Why is there machlokes? The breakdown of the tradition. Breakdown of the tradition through the vicissitudes of history. But you can only try to the best of your ability. Now this, on the one hand, what you take with one hand, you give away with another. On the one hand, it's a very stark contrast, let's say, to the Sadducees or the Karaites in the Middle Ages, and says, yes, we believe that every single part of Rabbinic Judaism is this is God's will, and this is what God gave at Sinai. On the other hand, we're saying that there was at some point a breakdown in the transmission of the tradition, and we're trying to recapture it. So theoretically, we may make a mistake, but it doesn't matter because lo b'shamayim hi, and God gives us the space to make mistakes, if you want to use a kind of parenting term. So God gives us the space, and we live with that space. That's the model. It's a very traditional model, and therefore every single halacha is really rooted in Sinai directly, and was given at Sinai directly, and hopefully Chazal, using their best things, and hopefully a kind of siyata d'shmaya, a kind of divine help, achieve the best goal and the best answer.
Does that include the halachot for Purim?
I'm sorry?
Does that include the halachot?
Not necessarily. Yeah, Purim could be a takana. Purim was a new holiday. You could theoretically take it further and say, yeah, maybe even they predicted things like Purim, but you don't have to. You could say, because they also admit that there were things like takanot and gzeirot, so this might be a takana that they felt it was important to establish a new holiday for Jewish history. Okay. On the other hand, there are two other approaches. The other approach, the most famous approach, is the sophisticated idea of the Rambam. Now the Rambam, and I want to start with, I just want to show you how nuanced the Rambam is at the end of his life, but we can't understand what he's saying here unless we go to the beginning of his earlier sources. But I just want to show you. The Rambam seems to be quoting the Gemara that I just started with. This is the first lines of the introduction to the Mishnah Torah, meaning one of the last books that he wrote, his magnum opus, the Mishnah Torah, the Yad HaChazaka. So this is how the Rambam starts. Kol ha-mitzvot shenitnu l'Moshe miSinai b'ferushan nitnu. It's very interesting. Rambam starts with a little different angle. It says all the mitzvot that were given to Moshe at Sinai were given with their explanation. Now he doesn't say, what does it mean, all the mitzvot that were given? The implication is maybe there were mitzvot that weren't given at Sinai. But he says, all the mitzvot given to Moshe at Sinai were given with their explanation. Shenemar, va'etna l'chat l'chot ha'even v'torah v'amitzvah. Torah zu Torah shebichtav, mitzvah ze perusha. Notice the Rambam changes the language of the Agadita. The Agadita says, zu Mishnah. This includes all of the Mishnah. The Rambam doesn't say. The Rambam says, ze perusha, the explanation of the mitzvot. V'tzivanu la'asot ha'torah al pi ha'mitzvah, u'mitzvah zu hi hanikreit Torah sheba'al peh. This is what we call Torah sheba'al peh. Now the Rambam here is being very coy, because, again, I don't know if he thought you knew the Gemara in Brachos or not, but he clearly does not quote the entire Gemara in Brachos. He doesn't say, Lahorotam ze Gemara. Doesn't quote the whole litany of the entire corpus. He says, there's a thing called Torah shbichtav, Torah, and then there's a thing called Perusha, its explanation. So this opens up a whole new world in terms of what was the Rambam's theory. And the Rambam, probably because, for two reasons, or many reasons, but we can conjecture, the Rambam did not believe in this original, the first theory we laid out, and he believed in a much more dynamic notion of the development of what we call the oral law, or what we call halacha. Probably one of the major factors, this is my conjecture, is because I think the Rambam, who felt very strongly the challenge of Karaism, I don't think the Rambam believed that original model would work, because he felt that you were conceding too much by saying, oh, the whole tradition is broken down over the course of many, many centuries, and that's why we have machloket. So if the tradition is broken down, so why should I listen to it? Maybe I'm totally off base. That's what I think. And so the Rambam, and you're conceding too much ground to the Karaites and to those who will undermine what we know as Rabbinic Judaism. And so the Rambam has a very different, I'm not going into all the details, but the Rambam, if you read the Hakdama Leperush HaMishnayot, which is one of his earliest works, the Rambam in one of his earliest works already lays out his belief in the Shalshelat HaMasorah, the development of the tradition. And he basically divides what's in the Mishnah and ultimately the Gemara into 5 categories. So we're going to come to the summary of the categories. The Rambam has developed it at great length, and now we come to this Rambam in source 3. This is in the middle of the Hakdama to the Perush HaMishnayos. The Rambam wrote when he was in his, mid-20s, I think. They divide into 5 parts. Perushim Mikubalim. The Rambam creates a new term that doesn't exist before in the corpus of halacha. He says Perushim Mikubalim, accepted explanations of the mitzvot, or Perushim that we have received by tradition. If you want to translate it, I think that's probably the best translation. Received explanations. Perushim Mikubalim Mipi Moshe. ויש להם רמז בכתוב, ואפשר להוציאם בדרך סברה, וזה אין בו מחלוקת. אבל כשיאמר האחד כך קיבלתי, אין לדבר עליו. The Rambam says, there is a whole group of mitzvot that are in the Torah Shebichtav, that alongside of them, Moshe Rabbeinu received an explanation, a translation, a definition. Ukshartem la'ot al yadecha, vayulu totafot beninecha. Doesn't say a box, but alongside the words la'ot, at that same moment, God gave Moshe the explanation of what that means. That's a perush hamikubal. V'yesh lahem remez bakatuv. There is a hint. You may be able, if you work long and hard enough, to find some reference, some logical way to figure out what you might be. You might not. It's possible to understand them b'derech svara, because you could say the word ot is always used here like this, like whatever it is. But that's not how it was. It was given at Sinai. The mitzvah, together with his explanation, was given at Sinai. V'zeh ein bo machloket. And the Rambam says, if you want to see the litmus test, to know whether I'm dealing with a halacha that was transmitted at Sinai as an explanation of the mitzvot, that's if it has machloket or not. If you don't find any debate about the law itself, I'm not talking about the derivation of the law. You might find debate, because the Rambam agrees that after the fact, you might be able to find a remez for the law. So there might be differences of opinion, what's the best remez or what's the best svara. But if you never find a debate, no one ever debated, should Jews wear tefillin or not? No, there was never in the history of halacha, do you wear tefillin, you don't wear tefillin, in the rabbinic corpus. Again, I'm not talking about Sadducees or Karaites. But within the rabbinic world, they only debated this, that. So the Rambam says, that means that there was a received tradition going back to Moshe, what this mitzvah meant, and given that, this is what is something, and if somebody says, I have a received tradition and I can show you, and I prove I have a received tradition, all discussion ends, and that's it. So that's the first category. Rambam doesn't say how much of the Torah Shebal Peh is. He just says this is part of the Torah Shebaal Peh. It is received tradition, given at Sinai. But it has an anchor in the text. Doesn't mean that the text is the derivative of the law, but you could somehow connect it to the text.
So how would we explain to a impending bar mitzvah boy that there's a strong possibility that Moshe Rabbeinu wore tefillin,
Yes.
and that there were black straps,
Correct.
seven,
Correct.
a box.
I don't know, seven.
Seven.
That's a minhag already, but that he wore some tefillin, and if you want to show him, you could show him Masada. You see how ancient it is that we found tefillin in Masada. We don't have tefillin from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, but we have tefillin that are very ancient. This was a very ancient practice, and that was it. Okay. Then the Rambam says there's a second category. Hachelak hasheni halacha l'Moshe miSinai. When the rabbis use the term halacha l'Moshe miSinai, Hema dinim shneimar b'hen halacha l'Moshe miSinai. Ve'ein ra'ayot aleihem. V'zeh kemo kein ein cholek alav. The Rambam says when there are laws in our tradition which were purely oral. They have no connection to the text. It's not what does ukshartem lo ta'edecha mean. It's totally okay. The best examples Chazal say shiurim are halacha l'Moshe miSinai. A kezayis, a kibetza, a meal, all these shiurim, halachic shiurim, these are all kind of an accepted thing, which have no anchor in the text, period. And they are purely oral tradition. Again, Rambam doesn't say how much of the Torah that is. Then the Rambam says the third part. Then he says, the third category is the most expansive. Hadinim hanovim misvara. These are laws that are derivative of svara. What does that mean? Hadinim shotziu darkei svara v'nafla b'hem machloket. These are laws that the rabbis derived by using logical methods, and there we have machloket, not because of the breakdown of tradition, but because the nature of human beings is that they can read a text and understand it differently, using the same exegetical tools. Kemo shezacharnu, v'nifsak hadin b'hen al pirot. L'maisa we have to paskin based on majority. V'zeh yikre, this could happen. K'shishtaneh ha'iyun, this can happen because there's different ways of analyzing the same text. Says Rambam. That's why you sometimes find in Gemara discussions, im halacha nekabel. If this is, you have this by tradition, we will accept it. V'im ladin, but if this is based on a svara, yesh tshuva, we have a corresponding svara. Aval nafla machloket v'ha'iyun b'davar shelo nishma bo halacha. Machloket and analysis only comes in something which we did not receive by tradition. Does a sukkah have 3 walls or 2 walls? Moshe never received by tradition. That's why there's room for the rabbis to debate using the exegetical principles that they inherited from going back to Sinai. They always ask, my taima, what's the reason? My nafkamina, shugorema machloket. V'omrina b'mai kamifligi. What are they arguing about? Oh, my time of the Raploni. Oh, my beinayu. What's the nekudat hamachloket? What's the at the core of their what's debating? V'him mevim oto anyan ze berov mekomot. V'zochrim hatam hagoreim l'machloket. And they always explain the rationale. Kegon shiaru Rabbi Ploni machzik tana ploni. Ploni machzik tana ploni. This one holds this way. This one holds there's a kabel chomer. This one says it's a hekesh. This one says it's a svara. And then here he comes and he attacks the traditional view. Aval mi sheyachshov shadinim shenechlakim bahem kemo kein mekubalim mipiyit Moshe. But the person who thinks that the mitzvot that we have tremendous debate upon, v'choshvim shenafla machloket kederech ta'ut halachot, because they made a mistake. Oh shilicha, because they forgot. Oh mipnei shechad ben kibel kabbalat emet v'ashini ta'a b'kabbalato shachach. And you think that one of them received the tradition and one of them didn't receive a tradition. And he says, you'll find some he says, I'm skipping 2 lines. Zeh hadavar migunem od. Such a theory is extremely distasteful. V'hu divrei mi she'ein lo seichel Ve'ein bi'ado ikarim. Someone who claims that every single jot and tittle was given at Sinai and just says that they forgot or they made a mistake, that person doesn't have seichel and he doesn't understand the foundations of halacha. Upogein, and you undermine ashpa anashim asher kiblu et hamitzvot v'chol zeh shav ubatel. He says this is totally wrong. And then he goes into a lengthy explanation of the famous statement in the Agadah. I'm not going to go into it. The famous statement in the Agadah, which claims that machlokas started to spread when the students of Shammai and Hillel lo shimshu kol tzorkam. They didn't study enough. So it sounds like it's a puncture in the system. And the Rambam tries to explain that that's not what it means. If you look at the bottom, that they didn't, what's the best translation? They didn't serve their teachers properly. Rabtam machloket b'Yisrael inyan ze mevuar shekol shnei anashim, two people b'yotam shavim b'seichel b'iyun, if they were equal in their wisdom and their analysis, ubiyata ikarim, and knowing the foundations by which you analyze a text, shiotziu lehem asvarot lo tipol behem machloket b'svartam b'shum panim. Says in general, two people that have the same training, that have the same IQ, that have the same sources, would probably come to a very similar conclusion. Because you see, Shammai and Hillel had very few machlokot. Aval, he skips to the bottom. When the students did not study as much, when they had these debates, it's because they were of different, not because there's a forgetting, but because they had this kind of training and they had this kind of training. This one studied a little bit more this aspect, this one studied, and that's what it means. And they simply had different training. One went to Yale and one went to Harvard. One focused on this more, one focused. And therefore, they could come to different conclusions because they had different strengths and weaknesses. This is what the Rambam says. Concluding, on the last lines, V'al hadrachim ha'elu nafla machloket. Lo mipnei sheta'u b'halachot. Not because they made a mistake. Shachar u'mer emet v'ashni sheker. Uma ma'od mevu'ar inyan zeh l'chol ha'mistakel bo. Uma yakar v'gadol zeh yikar b'mitzvot. Those are the first three categories. Again, the Rambam here, in this passage which we read, because does not tell us which is the majority. It doesn't say. The last two categories, which I'm not going into because they're obvious, Chachelek HaRevi'i are the Gzeirot. Chazal made a Gzeira. Right? You shouldn't drink water that's megula in the time of Chazal, because snakes. Right? Or don't eat fish and milk together because they thought it was a sakana. And some people, we still keep it. Most people still keep it today.
Or fish and meat.
I'm sorry, what did I say? Fish and milk? Fish and meat, that's what I meant. Fish and milk is a Sephardi thing. I meant fish and meat in the Gemara because it's sakana. That's a gzeira. Or takanot uminhagim. The fifth category are takanot. The rabbis made a takana. Every Monday and Thursday we should read the Torah. We should finish, 3 years we should finish the cycle of reading the Torah or reading this or read Haftarah, whatever. These are takanos. Or minhagim. According to the Gemara in Sukkah, the beating the Aravos is a minhag. According to some opinions, it's a minhag neviim. It's a minhag. Okay. Halal on Rosh Chodesh is a minhag. The Gemara says. If you did Daf Yomi, Daf Yudalid, the Tosfos there about Halal on Rosh Chodesh. Okay. The Rambam re-emphasizes this and sharpens it many years later, when he wrote the Sefer HaMitzvot. The Sefer HaMitzvot, he has 14 sharashim. The Rambam liked 14, the number 14. There's 14 books in the Chazaka. There's 14 sharashim. And this is what he says in that shoresh. Again, just to emphasize it. But he he spells it out a little bit sharper. The Rambam says, we explained in the introduction to the book that we wrote about the Mishnah. Sherov. Now he tells you exactly what he believes. Sherov. He says this also in the Parashah Mishnayos, but I didn't have a chance to photostat that. Just didn't have enough. Rov dinei Torah yatsu b'shloshes midot shator nidreshet v'shahadina yotzeh b'midam leotan midot dinei pamim tibol b'machloket. Most of what we call halacha is in that third category. Most of what is in halacha is in our dinei Torah that were derived by the 13 principles of exegesis. V'shahadin, and principles that are derived by them, sometimes you will have machloket. That's what he said. V'sheyesh, we also said, there are also dinim hein perushim mekubalim Moshe, ein machloket bahem. And I also taught you that there is a certain number of laws which are received explanations, traditions of mitzvot from Moshe, and those don't have machloket. But, as the Rambam hinted, and sometimes there you'll find rabbis who will try to bring a proof, but the real source is not the drasha. The real source is the received tradition. Because the nature of the divine text is so brilliant. Okay? Tov. So the Rambam says that. I'm skipping. And the Rambam then goes on to suggest that when the rabbis, is a very, very fascinating comment the Rambam makes. The Rambam says, when the rabbis will come to the conclusion and say, this is a din d'oraita, what they're hinting at is that whatever halachic discussion came beforehand is just window dressing. What it really means is that the source was by tradition, and the rabbis were trying to find a source in the text to connect it to the text. But if the rabbis do not say that something is d'oraisa, even if it's darshaned out by a pasuk, by a kal v'chomer or hekesh, it has a status of a din d'rabbanan. That's what the Rambam says here. Rambam says, if you look at the end of the first column, he says, towards the end of the line, let me start before that. We're in the middle of the page. Not everything that you derive by one of the drushos is necessarily from Sinai, because it might be window dressing. Not everything that is presented as a asmachta is necessarily d'Rabbanan. Sometimes it is actually derived directly from Sinai. Okay. If it should be counted as one of the taryag, and you can assume that the drashot were just window dressing. If they don't spell out that this drasha that they derived was a din doraisa, it is rabbinic. And then the Rambam comes to the conclusion on the next page. When he talks about counting the taryag, which was very important to the Rambam, second line, end of the line, Hine kvar hitba'er, ki taryag mitzvot, the 613 mitzvot, shenemru lo l'Moshe Sinai, lo yimneh bahem, will not necessarily include chol ma shilmad b'shlosh midot, v'afilu bizmano, even if they had been derived in the time of Moshe, when Moshe, top of the last page, okay? Even if they had been derived in the time of Moshe, Moshe was wearing his rabbi hat. He wasn't wearing his Navi hat. Kol shekain shelo yimneh mehem kol ma sheotziu b'acharit hazman. Certainly we should not include in the Taryag all these halachos that the rabbis derived later in history. Aval omnam, but in truth, yimneh ma shehaya b'feirush mikubal mimenu.
Where are you now?
In the bottom of the second of this page.
Yeah, and then I went on to the top of the next
No.
page.
What was run off is very different than what you've got in your hands.
Oh, look at the
We're
back.
bottom.
Look at the back of the next. Oh, it didn't come up.
We're at the bottom of the
Oh, I'm
third
sorry.
page of stuff.
Oh, okay.
That second paragraph of Sefer Amin
Okay.
Torah.
Sorry. It got printed differently.
So could you back up a little bit?
So I'm starting from the word, the last few words. Hinei kvar hipaer. Do you have it? Or didn't get printed?
It probably is. It's just not in the same place as you got it.
Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, here it's 5 lines from the bottom.
Okay. Hinei kvar
The,
hipaer.
the last 2 words.
Got it.
Yeah. Hinei kvar hipaer. Ki taryag mitzvot. Shenemru lo Moshe saying lo yimneh bahem kol ma sheyomad b'shlos esrei midot. You don't count everything as part of not necessarily. And even if they were derived historically in the time of Moshe was wearing his rabbi hat. Kol shekain shelo yimneh bahem kol ma sheotziu b'acharit hazman. Certainly, we're not going to include in the Taryag every halacha, because then if you include every halacha that you derive by a kal v'chomer and gzeir shava, you'd have thousands of mitzvot, not 613. Aval omnam, indeed, yimneh ma shaya b'feirush mikubal. We will include, as part of the corpus of Jewish law, as the Taryag, that which was received by tradition. V'hu sheyivaru ha'ma'atikim v'yomru shezeh davar asur la'asoto v'isuro doraita, o she'amru shu guf Torah. Hinei nimneh oto. When the rabbis explicitly said, this drasha is not the real source, it's really a doraita, it goes back to Sinai, we will know, Hinei nimneh oto, ki hu noda b'kabbalah v'lo b'hekesh. Because then we know that it wasn't really derived by the hekesh, it was really a tradition. Ve'omnam zachru hahekesh ve'eviu raya lav b'achad mishnei zot la'arot chokhmat hakatuv. It was only to show the greatness of the text. So for the Rambam, to summarize, there's part of what we call Torah Sheba'al Peh was given directly at Sinai. That's what we believe. And that's what the Rambam means when he says at the beginning, what we started with in the Hakdama to Mishnah Torah. Go back to the Hakdama, go back to source Bet now. Now you understand what he's saying, you understand his nomenclature. Kol hamitzvot shenitnu leMoshe b'Sinai b'feirushan nitnu. What's he saying? Category 1. All of the mitzvot that are in the Torah were also given with their explanation. When it says, God said, take a box with this, and that was given at Sinai. Not all of Mishnah, not all of Gemara, just that category was given. Then the Rambam introduced a second category called Halach l'Moshe Sinai, which has no text to connect to it at all. And then there's the third group, which he says, Rov Dinei Torah. The majority of what we know as Torah Sheba'al Peh are creative law that the rabbis drew out from the text. I skipped a line I want to go back to.
So that would be where, for example, with kashrut lo tefashel gedi b'chalev imo, that 2 sets of dishes and
maybe you'd have to look again. The Rambam would say you have to look at each law in and of itself and see, did the rabbis ever claim this is a d'oraita? Okay, or did they say that they never said that? They did a drasha, and it's not really a d'oraita, but they wanted to show the connection between the text and the law that had been that really isn't a d'oraita, and then the drasha is just to connect the text with a received tradition, going back to Sinai. Or no, do you say that this was a real law that the rabbis derived by their use of the 13 principles? Now look at the Rambam here. There's a part, there's a line I skipped, which I shouldn't. Go back to source number 4 in the Sefer HaMitzvot. You see the second paragraph.
Okay.
Rambam says,
You're getting Vu'ulai?
Ve'ulai. You see that? Ve'ulai. Source number 4, Ve'ulai. Ve'ulai tachshov. You'll think, Shani boreach milim notam. You'll think that I don't want to include these laws that the rabbis derived by the 13 principles in Svara in the Taryag, liotam bilti amitiot, that somehow they're not true. The Rambam says there's nothing with truth. That's not why they're not part of the Taryag. It's simply a category issue. Aval asibahi ki chol ma sheyotzi adam anafim min hashorashim shenemru l'Moshe miSinai b'veur v'hein Taryag hamitzvot v'afil hayam motzi Moshe v'atzmo ein ra'ui limnotam. The Rambam uses a wonderful metaphor. The Rambam says, you know what? There's shorashim and anafim. There's a tree with its trunk and its roots.
And branches.
And then there's branches. The branches grow out of the roots. But the branches were not there when the tree was first planted. They are derivative of the tree. The branches, the leaves, the fruit. But they are not necessarily historically the original trunk of the tree and the original. So that's the way the Rambam compares. For his purposes, Taryag mitzvot are only the trunk and the roots. Everything else is a derivation using the principles that Hashem gave. Now, if you want to be very, you could say it as, okay, it's there in potential. Whatever you want to use, that's fine. But it wasn't actually given its Sinai. That's what's important for the Rambam.
But are the branches Doraita?
So if I only had this piece, I would say maybe. But the Rambam said explicitly, if this is something, he said it. He said anything where the rabbis don't explicitly call it a Doraita is a Derabanan by default. That's what he says here. Which would mean that much of, not all, but much of what we call halacha derived by drushot is Derabanan. Now, I want to make it very clear, and this is the mistake that some people make in the Rambam. What the Rambam takes away with one hand, he puts together with another hand, because the Rambam in Helfgot Mamre, the Rambam in the laws of rebellion, where he talks about like a Zokein Mamre and a Benso, the Rambam says the Sanhedrin are the authority of Torah Shabbal Peh, Hein Ikar Torah Shabbal Peh, and the Rambam says the principle of Lo Tasur, that you have to listen to them, includes everything, including drashot that they derive from the text, and even the minhagim. So, yes, on the one hand, it may be that some of what we call today halacha, derived by drashot, is not biblical in the same sense, but it's still, you have to listen to it because we're not Karaites, we're rabbinic Jews. And Chazal, according to the Rambam, lo tasur, not to deviate, includes from their interpretation of the text, the laws that they derived. Now, eventually, another Sanhedrin can overturn them. That's the point. A Sanhedrin cannot overturn the meaning of what tefillin is, because that was a Perush HaMikubal at Sinai. But if a Sanhedrin would come later on, according to the Rambam, and have the authority to darshan the Torah again, they could darshan the Torah again, and change those laws if they came to a different conclusion that were based on drashot. Okay? But right now we have to listen because that's what it means to follow the rabbinic corpus. Yes?
I think it also gives validity to different rabbinic groups, like Ashkenazi versus Sephardic, different minhagim are equally valid because they were derived through this process.
Okay. Now I want to do one final model, and that's the model of the Ramban, which is a slightly different model. The Ramban, it's slightly different, but the Ramban writes as follows: Yaminus, right? The Torah says, "Lo tasur min hadavar sheyagidu lecha yaminus." You cannot deviate from what the rabbis, the Sanhedrin, not the rabbis, the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem says, which Chazal interpreted, means the Sanhedrin. They have the power to interpret the text. And the famous comment of the Sifrei, Afilu Omer Lecha Al Yaminu Small, V'Al Small Shu Yamin, right? Even if they tell you that black is white and white is black, you have to listen to them. Okay. Says the Rambam, V'inyano, what does it mean? Afilu Tachshov Bilivavcha Shehem Toim. Even if you think they made a total misreading of the text. V'Adavar Pashut Beinecha, Kasher Ata Yodea Ben Yimincha. And it's so clear, like you know the difference between your right and left. Taseh Kemitzvatam. You should follow them. Va'al Tomar, don't say, Eich Uchal Ochal hachelev hagamur. How can I eat this piece of chelev, this piece of fat, which I get a kares for if I eat it b'mezid? Or erog ha'ishanaki, or I have to take the life of this person in court. Aval tomar kach tziva oti ha'adon. But you should say, this is what God, who commanded the mitzvah, said I should do. When the people who control tell me this is the Torah. Okay, now I want to get to the second thing. He says as follows. He says, and this is a very important point. The Torah was written down. And it's clear that when new issues come up, that are noladim, that are born, not everyone will agree. Machloket is natural. Unfortunately, if we just let machloket go and everybody does their own thing, you believe that you can eat chicken and meat, and I believe chicken and milk, and you say no, and everybody will do their own thing. We'll have 500 religions. Famous, Rabbi Schachter always would talk about Sheilaism, about Sheila who made up her own religion. Everybody will have your own religion. If you take every single sheet on the Gemara, you could have 500 different Judaisms. Says, V'chatach lanu hakatuv adin, and therefore the Torah decided, Shenishma lebeit din hagadol ha'omed lifnei Hashem b'makom asher yivchar b'chol ma she'omru lanu b'ferush haTorah bein shekiblu perusho eid mipi eid u'moshe mipi agvura, whether they received it by tradition, O she'omru kein lefi mashma'ut hamikra o kavanata, or whether they did not have a tradition, but they come to the conclusion based on their use of their exegetical powers and resources that this is the meaning of the text. Ki al hada'at shelahem hu notein lanu haTorah. It's an amazing statement. This is called, in fancy schmancy legal terminology, the constitutive approach to law, which basically means the Ramban here says that it turns out retroactively that what Chazal say the text means is what the text means. Retroactively, al dat shalahem hu notein et haTorah, based on what they understand is what the Torah means. So then the question is, so what happens if a subsequent Sanhedrin comes to a different conclusion? So what does that mean? So the answer is rooted in the famous statement as understood by Chachmei Sfarad, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. These and these are the words of the living God. What does it mean, Elu ve'elu divrei? How can it both be true? So basically, if you look at the Ritva and Eruvin and other sources, and this is the root of this Ramban, the Ritva says what it means is that when God gave Moshe the Torah at Sinai, He showed him Shivim Panim L'Taher v'Shivim Panim L'Tameh. The text is multivalent. The text can admit of different understandings, and they're both potentially true. And when the Sanhedrin in a certain generation decides that this is the meaning, it's because it is a potentially legitimate read of the text. And so it is what they say is what God gave, because this is potentially what God gave. And they're choosing what God gave. And another generation, they may be choosing understanding number 65 of the text. But they constitute what the Torah should mean, because God gave a Torah that has plurality of meaning, and they are the ones who decide when they put it into practice what the Torah shall mean, so to speak. So it's a little bit different than the Rambam. It's a little bit different in terms of his understanding of what machloket is about. Machloket is again legitimate, but when you decide, when they decide based on their understanding, and they come to a conclusion, that's the conclusion of what it means in terms of the Torah. So today we examined models of what Torah Sheba'al Peh is, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when we say that God, Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai, what do we actually mean by Moshe Kibel Torah? And these debates go on till today. About 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, Rabbi Steinsaltz was put into Chayrim. One of the reasons he was put into Chayrim by elements in the Haredi world was because he published a book, his Madrich LaTalmud, I think it was, which basically adopted the Maimonidean approach to the development of the oral law. And there were people who were very uncomfortable with it. They were uncomfortable with a lot of other things, but one of the things they were uncomfortable with because this was not the kind of standard that they felt was right to be teaching the masses. And these debates continue till today about what does it mean, some of the debates in the 1800s around some of the writings of Zachariah Frankel and others who became, so to speak, the avot of the conservative movement, the kind of founders of historical Judaism. A lot of it developed upon how far were they going beyond the Rambam? Were they not going beyond the Rambam? Is it rooted in the? These were some of the debates around, and of course, when orthodoxy, this was part of the fighting that was going on with reform. So these debates continue till today. It's been a pleasure learning with you, as well as those online. And wish everybody a rest of a guten Winter, the rest of the winter. Usually in New York, February is the month when we get most of the snow. So I hope we don't have too much snow, but everyone should be safe and sound.
And schools.